Hello everyone, Michael the Librarian of Magic, finding and cataloging the magical and pointing you to it. Today is October the 14th already. Had to look at my calendar this time. And I got another villain drawing for you. We're already almost halfway through the month, through this third season of our Draw a Villain a Day series. And without further delay, today's villain is Bill Sykes from 1988's Oliver and Company. This is an interesting villain because Oliver and Company is a largely, I guess, forgotten or not talked about as much movie in the Disney animated canon. It is essentially based on Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, and Bill Sykes is a character in that book, although he's portrayed differently in this movie. Not just because it's a modern adaptation that takes place in like a New York City with animals and all of that kind of stuff, but also because in the novel, Sykes is sort of a lower tiered goon, I guess you could say, to this bigger boss named Monks. And in the movie Oliver and Company, Sykes is kind of the big boss. He's a loan shark and a racketeer and mafioso type. He does all the bad stuff. He was designed by animator Glenn Keane, who I mentioned before in the Fidget the Bat video, who designed a lot of these characters during this era. And he's sort of a bigger design, a stockier, larger guy. To me, he has a lot in common with Kingpin from the Marvel Comics in a way. He's sort of a bigger guy and also a similar character in that he has got his hands in every illegal pie. You know, he's a racketeer, he's a loan shark, and all of that kind of stuff. And they depict him in this movie as such. They depict him pretty ruthlessly. They don't glamorize the crime life at all in this movie. They don't make it funny or lighthearted or anything. They leave the comedy relief up to the animals and stuff. But Sykes is a pretty bad dude, and they characterize him as such. One of the interesting things to illustrate, I guess, his badness that they were going for in the movie is at one point during the movie you actually see him loading a gun, and it is the first time in Disney animation that you see a modern pistol on screen. That you see somebody loading a modern pistol on screen. The other thing about sort of going for a darker tone with this villain is he has a really brutal death scene, which they did quite a few times in this year. It was just an interesting era in Disney animation. They were trying a lot of stuff, experimenting with a lot of stuff. Anyway, if you haven't seen the movie, I guess spoiler alert, but Sykes ends up in a fiery car crash in the end. His car crashes into a train, and it's pretty awesome. It's a pretty awesome sequence, but it's pretty hardcore. So they went for, needless to say, they went for a darker tone with this character than some of the other villains, which is interesting. It gives the movie an interesting vibe. He doesn't have a lot of screen time, so it doesn't make the movie on balance darker. In fact, I would argue that overall it's not one of the darker Disney animated films because the music and the animal characters and Oliver and his gang keep things light. But when Sykes is involved, it does have some pretty serious darkness to it. The role of Sykes was originally going to be offered to Marlon Brando. In fact, I think I read somewhere that Michael Eisner himself offered the role to Marlon Brando personally, and Brando turned it down because he thought the movie wasn't going to be very successful. He thought it would flop. When in actuality, it turned out to be a relatively moderate success. But anyway, I guess they wanted Marlon Brando, and he just didn't go for it. Instead, they cast Robert Loggia, who had a pretty lengthy career playing a lot of bad guys, gangsters, drug dealers, mafiosos, all of that kind of stuff. He had sort of the look and voice for it, which, lent himself really well to this particular role. He did a few things with the Disney company over his career. This was the only thing he did in animation for Disney. He was involved in a handful of movies during the 90s for Disney's subsidiary studios. So if you are unfamiliar, during the 80s and 90s, Disney bought and ran some other movie studios to distribute other types of live action movies through. So if you've ever seen anything from Hollywood Pictures or Touchstone, those were distribution companies for the Walt Disney Company. So they produced those films in actuality. So in 1991, for Hollywood Pictures, there was a movie with Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger called The Marrying Man. Robert Loggia was in that. It was sort of a not very successful romantic comedy about a playboy who falls in love with a singer, entertainer girl in Vegas, and she's connected to the mob, and yada, yada, yada. In 1994, Robert Loggia was in the Touchstone picture I Love Trouble with Julia Roberts and Nick Nolte, which is sort of these two people that don't get along with each other, oil and water types, end up uncovering this conspiracy together about, I think it's genetically modified milk or something like that. It's another one that's not the greatest. But if you're into those actors, you may like it for what it's worth. And then in 1998, for Touchstone Pictures, Robert Loggia appeared in the movie Holy Man with Eddie Murphy, which is sort of an interesting one about this guy that Eddie Murphy plays, who's sort of this enlightened street prophet type who ends up inadvertently getting involved with selling a bunch of products on this TV shopping network. So yeah, all three of those movies are, varying degrees of quality, but you may be interested in some of those. But Robert Loggia appeared in those movies. Another thing he did for Disney that is of even greater interest to me than those three pictures, in 1958, he was in a 10-part miniseries called The 9 Lives of Elfego Baca, which aired on Walt Disney Presents in the late 50s. And it's about a real person named Elfego Baca who was a lawman in New Mexico Territory back in the territorial days and had... it's sort of a dramatized version of his life, protecting the territory and all that kind of stuff. But Robert Loggia was the title character in that. He played Elfego Baca. I haven't seen much of it. I've seen some clips, but it would be cool to watch more of it. I'd be interested in watching the whole miniseries. Some of the episodes were edited together and packaged together into a theatrical film, which they did several times. I'd mentioned before with Davy Crockett and the River Pirates and Zorro. They also did that with Elfego Baca. They edited some of the episodes together and made a feature film called Elfego Baca Six Gun Law, which premiered in West Germany back in 1962, but then was re-released back in the States, I think, as a TV movie called Elfego Baca Attorney at Law. So it's one of those weird... If you find those two movies are the same movie, and even if you find those movies, they're just edited episodes of the original 10-part miniseries that aired on Walt Disney Presents. You can find those miniseries on the Walt Disney Treasures DVD series. There's one with the Swamp Fox and Elfego Baca on a DVD together, but those things are really hard to find, and they're astronomically expensive on the internet. I really, really wish Disney, if you're ever listening, please just release the Walt Disney Treasure series with the special features and Leonard Maltin's intros and all that stuff on Disney Plus, and get rid of the ridiculous scalping that goes on in the internet for those DVD packages. I just wish that I and more people had legitimate access to all of those things without having to pay an arm and a leg, or not being able to find them. So anyway, you can find those out there if you get your hands on those DVDs, or if you're lucky enough to have one. Hopefully someday Disney will release all of that stuff onto Disney Plus, and really dig into their library and just put all those Disney Treasures things on there. That would be so awesome. But yes, The Nine Lives of Elphego Baca had Robert Loggia in the title role. So that would be a cool thing to check out. I'd like to see more of. And he did a good job with Sykes in Oliver and Company here. A really interesting villain, a pretty straightforward but dark, realistic villain in this case. He's just a guy who does horrible stuff, horrible crimes. And yeah, that's kind of unique and interesting, actually, in the catalog, the Disney animated catalog. Most of the villains are sort of, over-the-top characters. They're not always human. Sometimes they're silly and goofy, but this is a really straightforward one. So, yeah, if you want to see more of it, I would check out Oliver and Company, which is on Disney Plus. Hopefully you enjoyed learning a little bit about this role in this movie. Maybe it inspired you to go check out the movie or read Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, which is what it's based on, if you've never seen that, or various incarnations of film versions of Oliver Twist. There's musicals, etc., etc. It's a pretty well-mined property. So thanks as always for watching these. I hope that this was entertaining and informative, and I will be back again tomorrow with another one of these. And until then, take care. Have a great day.